What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show. As always, I'd like to say you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. Do know that this is the home of conversations, and I'm the host of Epic Conversations. And do note, I was a 2018 award winner of the Innovation, handed out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. And I'm very happy about that. I've put in another entry this year, so we're going to see that this works out okay. Not going to spend too long me chatting tonight because we only have a short amount of time for part one for another epic conversation, and we always like to have new friends on the platform. Let's make it quick. Let's get to it. New friend is Baltimore native, or Be More native, David Miller, has received international acclaim for Dare to be a King. What if a Prince lives? A survival workbook for African-American males, a thought-provoking 52-week curriculum teaching adolescent males how to survive and thrive in toxic environments. In 2015, Mr. Miller collaborated with the SALT Project on a short video titled Get Home Safely, 10 Rules of Survival is Stopped by the Police. The groundbreaking video outlines steps for navigating police encounters, was nominated for an Emmy, and has been featured by BBC, NPR, CNN, MSNBC, PBS, HuffPost, US and Canada, and hundreds other media outlets. Armed with a bachelor's degree from the University of Bmore and a master's degree from Butcher College, he frequently leads intergenerational conversations with men and boys focused on fatherhood, boyhood, parenting, mental health, managing anger, decision-making, healthy relationships, and alternatives to violence. I could go further, but I'm just also saying he's currently a PhD student in the School of Social Work at Morgan State University. He's written several children's books. He's also a consultant with the National Mentoring Resource Center, providing technical assistance to mentoring programs, an effort funded through the Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention and the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse, providing technical assistance to federal initiatives for fathers and families. He's married and raising 3 wonderful children in Washington, D.C., and he's going to spend some time with us tonight talking about parenting Black children. And we first met earlier on this year when we were on a panel up here in Toronto. The panel was called How Are Black Fathers Teaching Love to Their Black Sons? Let's welcome for the first time and not the last time, Mr. David Miller. How are you this evening, sir?
Good evening, Dr. Vibe. How are you doing? And to your, I'm sure it's going to be a live conversation, delving deeper into what we need to do to support our children.
Wonderful. I know we only have a limited amount of time, but I want to ask, what was your experience being parented as a young man?
So even though I grew up in West Baltimore, I was raised by Peter and Carol Miller. My mother was a school teacher. Father worked for the United States Post Office. And so while I experienced my fair share of setbacks outside of my home, I grew up in a very peaceful, loving, affirming household. Every other Saturday, we went to the library, which really developed my love for children's books and literacy.
In this video, I'll show you how to set up and manage live streams.
Go ahead. Sorry about that.
But my parents really gave me the secret sauce to be able to grow up in a very tough neighborhood. I grew up on the west side of Baltimore, went to a very tough high school, experienced a tremendous degree of trauma, which my parents helped me navigate, mainly losing a lot of friends to gun violence at a young age, losing friends starting at 11 years old to suicide. And then when I was a freshman in college, my best friend, he was also in college. He was shot and killed standing next to me. But because I had a very strong family, and I grew up in a community that valued family, even though guys were selling drugs and guys were involved in criminal activity. There was even a code of ethics, if you will, among drug dealers in my community. And the guys in my community said that they saw something in me where they wouldn't even let me sell drugs. Even if I wanted to sell drugs, they wouldn't let me. So I grew up at a time when there was even a code of ethics. And that may sound crazy, But there was even a code of ethics among drug dealers. We not robbing pregnant women. We not gonna have young boys stand on the corner selling drugs. You know, we may be involved in criminal activity, but we have parents. And so I had an amazing childhood growing up. But again, as a young Black male living in the United States, experienced my fair share of a trauma and loss.
What influences as a young Black man did your parents instill in you and that you still carry on today in your journey of Black manhood?
So one was this deep notion of social debt. And as I think back to many of the lessons that my father taught us, that we had a debt to pay to the larger society, being Black in America, that we would grow up and do great things, but we could never turn our back on our community. And so my father and mother really instilled this notion early on, pay it forward, that there is a social debt that we all must pay. And they really helped me understand that through just being able to look at how other families were raising their children in our community, and even looking even at other members of our own family who may have been struggling academically, financially, or socially, that part of the fabric of being Black anywhere in the world, based on what happened to us in terms of the Mayaffa or the transatlantic slave trade, that we have always been a people who have looked out for each other in spite of, and that we've always been a people who believed in giving back, no matter what your circumstance was. And so those were some of the really early lessons that I learned growing up. And it's real interesting. Earlier today, I did a lecture today with some young brothers in a program called the Literacy Lab. And these are high school age Black males who are basically taking a gap year. They haven't gone to college yet. And during their gap year, they receive funding to go back and mentor and tutor young Black males in high school around literacy principles. And I was talking to these brothers about spirituality and this belief that there's something greater than ourselves, and that has always been an integral part of how Black folk raise family. That there was a strong thread of spirituality, not necessarily religion, but spirituality. And I shared that with these young brothers, 18, 19-year-olds, recent high school graduates. And they said it was the first time somebody had ever had a conversation with them about spirituality. And so again, I'm a byproduct of all of those teachings that I received from my parents.
Wonderful. I know that you've been very involved in education, being educated. Was that something that your parents also instilled in you?
Yes, and a love for reading. I still think back to those days when my parents would present me with a National Geographic magazine. I fell in love with National Geographic at an early age, and was just always enamored by photographs of life in Africa or photographs of life in Asia. And so I knew very early on that I wanted to be a global citizen, that I wanted that any work that I was involved in would really be around looking at life and human development from a global perspective. And so education, those library visits, and even though we hemmed and hawed and everybody else was out on the ball field or hanging out on Saturdays, sometimes we dreaded going to the library. But again, it was part of our framework as a family, and it has really paid off. I'm a voracious reader and writer. I'm always encouraging folks to set the phone down, just like when I talked to these young brothers earlier. One of the tips that I share with them is you got to read, man. When I remember reading something about Frederick Douglass probably over a decade ago, and it still sticks with me, is that when he learned how to read and write, he realized that he was unfit to be a slave.
Wow, that's powerful. That's really powerful. When did you realize in your journey that David Miller would have his core is parenting, especially parenting aspects, serving young Black men? When did you realize that?
I probably realized it early on. I was a young school teacher, very idealistic, wanted to save the world, teaching at a pretty rough school system in Baltimore. I'd already had my first daughter. And again, while I grew up in urban America, just being in the schoolhouse and seeing the day-to-day challenges that students that I work with, that I loved, that I was fond of, the day-to-day reality of students, that while many of them were gifted beyond measure, their issue was not math or history or social studies or foreign language. Their issue was they were trying to navigate school culture and family culture. And that school culture and family culture collided, because a lot of the things that these young people were learning at home were, to some respect, contrary to what we taught in the schoolhouse. In the schoolhouse, if you get into a conflict or disagreement, even as a 6 or 7-year-old, we want to work on those conflict resolution and mediation skills. But the sad reality is I was working with students that parents were teaching them that if somebody gets in your way, you knock them out, you neutralize them. And so I learned early on, and again, even though I grew up all Black neighborhood, west side of Baltimore, it was really an epiphany when I started to work with other people's children, and I realized that many parents were not raising their children the same way that I was raised.
Okay. There's so much in such little time. So let's go at it this way. From the times that you were in the education system, the challenges you saw that raising or parenting Black children existed then, compared to the challenges of parenting Black children now, are there similarities? Are there differences?
I think that there's some similarities, and I think that there are some differences. Rule number one, as a parent, you are your child's first teacher. That's a constant. No matter who the principal is, no matter who your English teacher is, mom and dad need to be your first teacher. So that's a constant. That's something that's never going to change. It was the same thing when I was 10 or 11 years old. It's the same thing now, and I have a 14-year-old. Right, my youngest is 14 years old. What's changed, Dr. Vibe, is such a huge emphasis on technology, and technology has been both a game changer, but it's also been a disruptive factor in the way people parent. And so as we look at 2019, 2020, and years to come, it is increasingly important for parents to be ever vigilant in monitoring what their children are seeing and what their children are doing. Because when you think about the impact of technology on parenting, it has become a game changer. Let me give you one example. I just did a webinar for the U.S. federal government last Wednesday on fathers taking a more active role in managing screen time for their children, right? In the US, children 13 and up spend on average 8.6 hours a day using technological devices, whether it's accessing Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or TikTok, looking at porno, whatever, you name it, that an overwhelming number of teenagers spend what would be considered a full work day on social media and other technology, watching television. And this would be hours in the morning before school. So let's say a child gets up 6 a.m., they do everything they got to do to get ready for school, and then they may spend 45 minutes to an hour surfing the net, looking at YouTube videos, etc. Then that young person gets home at 4, and then from say 4 o'clock to maybe even midnight, they may crack open a book and do a little bit of homework. But an overwhelming amount of our children are preoccupied and distracted by social media. And so being a parent now in 2019 requires a whole new set of skill sets. One is making sure that you are literate enough and have the technological savvy to understand what your child is listening to, hearing, and or seeing as it relates to technology. That's number one. Number two is, and my parents used to always say this to me when I was younger, you don't have friends unless we know them and we've met their parents. So when you think about social media now, it is even more incumbent for parents to determine strategies and ways to figure out who your child was even friends with. Most Americans who have teenagers have no idea who their child's friends are, because most young people nowadays have a set of school friends, maybe a set of community friends, and Dr. Vibe, they now have a set of friends that they only interact with on social media. And so this notion that as parents, we really got to step up our game, that we can't just let Lisa or Michael be in his or her room with the iPad for 4 hours after dinner, not knowing what is happening. And so it is super important that we have to retrain ourselves as parents. We have to connect with folks who can help us better understand what our children are seeing, what our children are watching, because this, again, with technology, it's a game changer.
I really like how you're breaking the conversation down here. And I just want to shout out to two people watching on the Get Vocal platform. Well, shout out to Aaron and shout out to Dre. Please feel free if you want to come in on the Get Vocal platform and ask any questions, make any comments. I know, Dre, it's always good to have you. You are a Black educator yourself, and you teach at the public school level, and you have some sons yourself. So this is a great conversation to add positive value to, like you always do in my conversations. David, I want to get a little deeper. One of the things you mentioned you are for parents to realize that they're their child's first teacher. Why do you feel parents are not recognizing and or acting on that in today's society, Black parents?
I just think that we've become so busy. I think that we've become so busy being on our own social media platforms and within our own lives in terms of the things that we're doing, that we're just not taking the time to touch base and check in with our children on a regular daily basis. That's number one. Number two, I think when you think about how the economic landscape has unfolded, parents are working more hours now than ever before. And so, you may have a family that has to drop off a child at daycare at 7 in the morning, and they may not pick that child up from daycare to 8 p.m. So because of the labor market, it's actually forcing parents to work longer hours, to work 2 jobs. And then when those families come home, they may not necessarily have a lot of downtime to spend, doing homework or just touching base and finding out how the day went. But touching base, man, I can't underscore the need. Even when I'm out of the country, Dr. Vibe, if I'm in Ghana, if I'm in London, I'm in Toronto, I'm touching base with my children, man. Whether, even if we do a video chat or, because I'm in Ghana, pretty regularly when I'm in Ghana. Sometimes the video chat is not working. I'm calling or WhatsApp, but just touching bases with our children and just hearing what they have to say and sort of gauging their heart are just some things, man, that we got to do more of every day, because we live in a society where, interestingly enough, man, I'm doing a presentation in Pennsylvania in about 2 or 3 weeks. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about is where we are as a society when in elementary schools, Dr. Vibe, they're doing shooting protocol drills in elementary school, showing elementary school children how to flip over the table, how to lock the door. There's even a company now that's manufacturing Kevlar book bags. Kevlar is bulletproof.
Yep.
Bulletproof.
Yep.
There are companies that are manufacturing bulletproof book bags. So that's where we are as a society. And so, man, we have serious work to do on the parenting front in terms of addressing the social and emotional literacy of our children, if you will, managing our children's expectations, their anxieties, and their fears. In the work that I do with young Black males across the country, man, young brothers are terrified of the police.
Oh yeah,
because they know what can happen. And so again, that's a deeper level of parental engagement. I developed this piece called The 10 Rules of Survival. If stopped by the police, it's gone viral. It's, people have seen it on CNN. But I developed that because those were some of the things that I learned from my father, and my father learned that from his grandfather, right? So we got to have these conversations with young people, addressing their fears and their anxieties. We got to have these conversations with young people about addressing the racial trauma of being Black in a society, whether you're in Canada or whether you're in the US or abroad. The rise in hate crimes, the rise of white supremacy groups, and the daily racial trauma that we're confronted with. Here in the US, the Caucasian white female police officer who walked into the wrong apartment and killed a brother. They just found her guilty. Again, the racial, when have you ever heard of a police officer walking into the wrong apartment and shooting and killing somebody? So you had a white officer who said that she had walked into the wrong apartment and she was startled by the presence of this brother, shot him and killed him. So that's the racial trauma that's happening to young people and adults.
And I hear what you're saying. And do you also feel it's a two-pronged effort, because there has to be education of our young people, but there has to be an education of the parents, and it's not getting easier, let alone to be a parent. It's not getting any easier being a Black parent.
No. And so it's really interesting because we're getting ready to roll out some more products for families. And sometimes, Dr. Vibe, it's painful, the kind of workshops and educational materials that we have designed and that we'll be designing in the future. So we designed this piece for parents to have these conversations, and it started because I remember when we were younger, me and my brother were robbed at gunpoint for starter jackets in the late 1980s. The starter jackets were pretty popular, but there every single year, every single day, young people are being robbed of iPhones, designer jackets. So we've developed a workshop and some collateral material for parents to help parents have some language and some talking points to share with their children around what to do if you're being robbed. Now, 2019, and we have to have this conversation with our children about what to do if you're being robbed, because particularly here in the US, too many young Black people are being robbed at gunpoint by other young Black people. And so,
Same here.
yeah,
Same here.
yeah. And so we're going to be rolling this stuff out in the next 2 weeks, and I'm going to send it to you. I'm going to send you some electronic copies because
Yep.
young people need to understand your life is not worth a pair of Timberland boots, that your life is not worth a Columbia rain jacket. I don't care if you paid, $400 for the jacket. We can get you another jacket, right? But just going over some basic things around what to do if you're being robbed. And so, we've created workshops and educational material for parents that really deal with some of these really difficult situations. But then we've also developed educational materials around how do you better advocate for your son or daughter in school, right? Even if you work 2 or 3 jobs and it's very difficult for you to make the PTA meeting, you still need to have an active, ongoing personal relationship with your child's teacher. Everybody not going to be able to make the PTA. So we've developed materials like that, helping fathers navigate situations when they are the non-custodial parent. And because mom or dad are not on the same page, how do we get dad access to the school? Because a lot of times dad's name is not even on the emergency card, right? So the
Yep.
school doesn't even know dad even exists, right? So how do we have those courageous conversations with mom and help mom understand that just because you and dad don't get along and you constantly saying you don't need a man, you might not need a man, but your son or daughter does. So man, really pushing the envelope and having these really deeply important conversations with parents is just some of the work that we're engaged in.
Yeah, it's so important, and that, like, the name may not be on the card, but as your cohort, Mr. Kenneth Braswell
Yes,
of Fatherhood Incorporated said, and I'll never forget when he was on the Dr. Vibe show, he said he never uses the word fatherless
right.
because he says every child has a father. The question is, where is that father?
That's it. That's it. Every child has a father, and I think all too often we've bought into this narrative that Black fathers are missing when that is not necessarily the case. There's some brothers out here in need of our support and encouragement, and I find when I'm able to get with some of these brothers and help them understand, look, man, hey, your child gonna grow up to hate you, man. We need to figure out how we reconcile. Um, there needs to be some apologies. Um, there needs to be a situation where the sister and the whole family don't trust you, and you got to understand based on your behavior, you can't be trusted. So we gotta gradually. They may not be willing to give you an overnight visit because historically you've been a liar, or historically you've been involved in activities that's not appropriate for you to have an overnight visit with your child. So your first couple visits might have to be at the library. And you got to be patient enough to understand that, bro, you done made some mistakes, man. You done violated some trust, right? You done broken some folk, and so you got to be willing to have thick skin and go through this process so you can be reunited with your family.
Said it well. Well said. Melvin Lars is saying that the NAACP also has a program called Cop Stop Program. It's been in force since 2009. Are you aware of that program?
Very, 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 very familiar with it. Very, very, very familiar with it. And I think the only difference between what we do, NAACP is doing good work. We really want to be we really go in the community. We like to be in the community with them young dudes that might be standing on the corner, selling drugs, because those are the young people that need to understand that you're most at risk for police stops. I mean, we're all at risk, but those that are involved in criminal behavior or even just hanging out, that you're most at risk for those police stops.
Well, I know that your time is, well, actually, Melvin is going to jump in because I know that your time is limited, but I definitely want Melvin to come in and add some positive vibe to the conversation. Hopefully, we're going to get him in. Oh, here we go. Hey, Melvin, how are you? Can't hear you.
Yeah, can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
Turn your microphone on.
Yes, brother. Turn on your mic. Still can't hear you. Oh, you're on mute. That's probably why. Okay, for some reason you are muted, and I can't unmute you for some reason. So I'm going to suggest you go out and come back in.
Mm.
Okay. Well, let's try this. Let's see if he gets in this time. So, still can't hear you.
Still mute.
No problems. Try again. So I'm going to continue on with David before he has to go. David, you do a lot of trips to Ghana.
Yes.
Compare parenting in a Ghanaian environment versus an American environment.
So I mean, when you travel to Africa or the Caribbean, family life is, I mean, it's still a great deal of reverence for family. Um, the family unit is still preserved, if you will, still validated, still honored, still revered. I just find here, it just seems like we have lost this notion of family in a lot of respects. And while people may say families are important in conversation, we can just look at public policy. Um, we can look at many of the laws on the books that are still ripping families apart or making it difficult for moms and dads to co-parent, you know, from a public policy standpoint. But then also the sad reality is when you go into a lot of communities, you see young folks raising themselves. Man, last Friday, I was training some young, not necessarily young, but some men on my Dare to Be King curriculum. And when we went around the room, one of the questions that I asked these guys is, what kind of relationship did you have with your father or male figure growing up?
Huge
And
question.
most of these guys in the room basically said that they ended up fathering themselves. And I said to them, well, what does that mean? You know, but you know, and I had to really get them to back up and realize that there had to have been a man who helped you along the way, even if he was, because all of these guys have spent anywhere from 8 to 15 years in prison. Even if it was a guy that you met in prison, and he taught you some life affirming principles, even though y'all was locked up, you learned something from that experience to help you be a better man or a better father. But again, I'm hearing too many young black men and older black men talk about that they fathered themselves. And so this issue of parenting, and now, Dr. Vibe, what we're seeing a lot of is mothers are rolling out. Their mothers are throwing in the towel. Their mothers are saying, the child is 7 or 8 years old. I don't want to do this no more. And so we see moms rolling out now.
Melvin, give it another try. Still can't hear you. Don't know what's going on. That's all right. Try again. So, David, this is, and it's interesting you say that. I can relate. There's a story I can relate that about 3 years ago, I had the privilege of hosting a conversation for Black fathers called Minding Our Minds. And it was a conversation about Black fatherhood and mental health. And a day before the conversation, we only had 3 fathers register. The day of the conversation, 40 showed up.
Nice.
And I had my flip chart ready there for conversation topics, but it just came to my mind. I asked that question you just shared. I asked to the fathers there, how many of you fathers have or had a good relationship with your father?
Mm-hmm.
And only 3 hands went up. I stayed on that conversation topic for the whole night. Didn't go anywhere else. I said, there's something here that really has to be addressed and really opened up and deepened. And I think we have
Yeah.
to have more and more of those conversations with all Black fathers, no
Mhm.
matter what, where they're at. That is a core question.
It is, man, and I'm excited to hear about your project in Toronto, and keep me posted, because there are a number of dads here in the U.S. It's also time for just us to really have this much larger global
Yes,
conversation,
yes,
so that we
yes.
can heal, so that we can network, and that we can support each other, man. It's time.
Yeah. Melvin, we're going to give you one more chance. No, not happening. No waits. Okay,
Is the volume on your computer turned up, Melvin?
yeah, what? No, we for some reason can't hear you. You may want to do a total refresh, Melvin, and we'll give you maybe one more try, but we're going to start winding it out. So, David, this is part one because I know time is short with you. Um, First, thanks for taking time out of your positive, productive schedule. For part one, do you have any closing comments, thoughts?
That just that our our backs are up against the wall, man. When you look at what's happening to Black folks globally, it's time that we lock arms in solidarity, and get some of this work done, man. The lives of our children are at stake, and so
Our
I
future.
I, I just believe that um, this body of work, in terms of working with fathers, working with families, I just really believe that we can turn the corner, but it's going to take us approaching the work very differently. It's going to take some natural and unnatural collaborations, and it's going to take a renewed commitment to family, because literally, man, the lives of our children are at stake.
And not only the lives of our children, say our future is at stake.
Our future is at stake. Yeah.
You know, our future is at stake.
Yeah, yeah,
Melvin,
yeah,
I'm going to
man.
give you one more try. I have a feeling you're not doing. No, I can't hear you. So, no problem. Next time, my man. Next time. Next time. So, David, uh, thanks again. I know you got to run, but there's going to be a part two. If people want to find out more information about yourself, how can they do that?
Easiest way is go to daretobekking.net, DareToBeking.net, daretobekking.net. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram at UChangeNow, UCHANGENOW. Or if you're on Facebook, you can go to our Facebook page at Dare to Be King Project. And looking forward to coming back next week for part two.
Absolutely. And I'll put all that social media contact information on the post with the replay of this epic conversation. My name is Dr. Vibe, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, the home of epic conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations, 2018 Innovation Award winner, given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. We will be back with part two next week. Uh, as I always, coming up tomorrow night at 7 p.m., we have Sean N. Murray on. And if you've not heard about this lady, it's a lady you need to check out and come tomorrow night. She's done a myriad of things in her journey, but she is right now writing a screenplay called Chicago 1919. And I knew nothing about this, but it is a film that's going to be produced talking about the race riots in Chicago in 1919. I had no idea about this subject until she
Mhm.
brought it to my attention, and it is going to be an epic conversation. So, yes, she was on a very good friend of mine, Dr. Tachi. She was on Mediascope today, but she's going to be talking about that project tomorrow. She also does work with Flint, Michigan, and the water crisis. So there's a lot of things that this lady is doing and has done and will be doing. You need to check out. So if you're watching this live, 7 p.m. tomorrow evening, October 3rd, right here on the Dr. Vibe Show. As we always say, live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Next up, sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. block assumptions, and aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. God bless, peace, well, keep the faith. Thanks to Melvin. Thanks to Dre. Thanks for Aaron and everyone watching live or on the replay, or everyone listening live on the replay. God bless, peace be well, keep the faith, and walk good. Good night, everybody.